If you're a working parent with ADHD who wakes up exhausted, drags yourself through the day on caffeine, and falls into bed at night only to lie there with your brain still running, this video is for you. I used to feel that way every single day, and 6 small changes fixed it. I'll share those 6 changes with you. First, let's talk about why so many working parents with ADHD are chronically tired, because I don't think it's what most people assume. We tend to think that being tired means we need more sleep, and sometimes that's true. But we can get a reasonable number of hours and still wake up feeling like we barely slept at all. We hit snooze 3 times, roll out of bed, and spend the first hour of the day just trying to feel human. Here's what I've come to understand. Sleep quantity and sleep quality are 2 completely different things. You can spend 8 hours in bed and still wake up exhausted if the sleep you're getting isn't restorative. And for working parents with ADHD especially, who go to bed with a brain that won't stop, wake up to a mental load that's already waiting, and spend all day context switching between work brain and parent brain, the conditions for truly restful sleep are often just not there. There's a layer to this that's specific to ADHD brains, and I think it's really important to name. Most of us with ADHD experience something called delayed sleep phase, meaning our brains naturally want to stay awake later and wake up later than the rest of the world. Add to that fact that ADHD brains often struggle to disengage from stimulation, which means that even when we're tired, our brains are still seeking input. One more scroll, one more episode, one more thought spiral before we finally let ourselves rest. By the time we actually fall asleep, we've often already robbed ourselves of the early sleep stages that do most restorative work. There's also something called your circadian rhythm, your body's internal clock, that most of us are unknowingly working against every single day. Your circadian rhythm regulates when your body feels alert and when it feels sleepy, and it's heavily influenced by light, movement, timing, and habits. When those things are inconsistent, which, let's be honest, is basically the default state for a working parent, your internal clock gets confused. You feel tired when you should be awake, and wired when you should be winding down. And no amount of extra hours in bed fixes a clock that's running on the wrong schedule. The last thing I want to say before we get into the changes is this. I spent a long time treating tiredness as just a normal part of my life. Like it was something I had to accept because I had ADHD and a child and a career, and that's just how it is for people like me. But chronic exhaustion is not inevitable, and it's not just the ADHD tax you have to pay. It just means your body and brain are missing something they need. And the good news is that most of those things are within your control. So let's talk about the 6 changes that made the biggest difference for me. I want to start with the one that surprised me the most, because when most people think about fixing their sleep, exercise may not be the first thing that comes to mind. We think about bedtime routines and sleep hygiene and what time we go to bed. We don't usually think about what we did with our bodies earlier in the day. But for me and for a lot of people with ADHD specifically, this was the change that made everything else work better. Here's why exercise matters so much for ADHD brains in particular. One of the core challenges of ADHD is that our brains are often in a state of low arousal. Not enough dopamine, not enough stimulation, not enough of the neurological signal that says, okay, we're engaged, we're regulated, we're good. Exercise is one of the most effective natural ways to raise that baseline. It releases dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin, the same neurotransmitters that ADHD medication targets, which means a good workout can do for your brain chemistry what it struggles to do on its own. And here's the sleep connection. When your ADHD brain gets genuine physical exertion during the day, it has a legitimate reason to power down at night. The restlessness that keeps so many of us lying awake, the legs that want to move, the mind that won't stop, the feeling of being tired but not sleepy, is often partly a body that hasn't worked enough during the day. Exercise helps burn that through excess energy in a way that scrolling through your phone at midnight simply does not. For me personally, I noticed a difference within the first week of exercising consistently. I wasn't just falling asleep faster, I was staying asleep longer and waking up feeling like the sleep had actually done something. I wasn't dragging myself out of bed the same way I used to. I want to be clear that I'm not talking about intense daily workouts. Even moderate movement most days of the week made a meaningful difference. The key is consistency over intensity. Even a 30-minute walk counts. What matters is that you're moving your body with enough regularity that it becomes part of what your brain expects from the day. One note for parents with ADHD specifically: if you're going to exercise, timing matters. Try to get your movement earlier in the day rather than late at night. Evening exercise can raise your cortisol, stress, and body temperature at exactly the wrong time, making it harder to fall asleep. Morning or early afternoon exercise is ideal, and it sets your circadian rhythm on the right track for the rest of the day, which ties directly into several of the other changes we're going to talk about. If I had to pick the single most impactful change I made, it might be this. And it's also the one that requires the most consistency to work, which makes it both the most powerful and the hardest for an ADHD brain to stick to. But once it clicked for me, everything else became easier. The concept is simple: go to bed at roughly the same time every night and wake up at roughly the same time every morning, even on weekends. I know that last part is where most people check out, but here's why it matters so much. Your circadian rhythm, that internal clock we talked about earlier, is anchored by consistency. When you go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, your brain starts to anticipate those transitions. It begins producing melatonin earlier in the evening because it knows sleep is coming. It starts ramping up cortisol before your alarm goes off so that waking up doesn't feel like being hit by a truck. Your body essentially prepares itself for sleep and waking up, rather than being caught off guard every single time. This is especially important with ADHD because we don't naturally regulate these transitions well. We don't get the subtle "it's getting late, start winding down" signal that neurotypical brains receive more reliably. But if we give our brains an external structure, a consistent schedule that it can learn to trust, it starts to build that signal for us over time. You're essentially training your brain to know what's coming, which reduces that friction around both falling asleep and getting up. The weekend piece is hard. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Sleeping in feels earned after a long week, but here's what actually happens when you sleep in significantly on the weekends. You're essentially giving yourself social jet lag. You shift your internal clock forward by an hour or two, and then Monday morning you're trying to wake up early again, and your body has no idea why. It's like flying to a different time zone every Friday night and flying back every Sunday. So no wonder Mondays feel brutal. My recommendation is to allow yourself a maximum of 30 to 60 minutes of flexibility on weekends, enough to feel like a small treat without completely derailing your clock. And try to do that just on Saturday or Sunday. Over time, as your sleep quality improves, you may find you don't even want to sleep in because you're actually waking up feeling rested, which honestly felt like a miracle the first time it happened to me. The evening is often one of the most chaotic parts of the day. You're finishing up work, getting dinner on the table, managing bedtime for kids, trying to decompress from everything that happened, and somewhere in there you're supposed to just fall asleep. It's no wonder so many of us lie awake staring at the ceiling even when we're exhausted. The problem is that ADHD brains have a particularly hard time transitioning between states. Going from fully activated, managing everything, to calm and ready for sleep isn't a switch we can just flip. We need a bridge. That's what an evening routine is. It's not about being rigid or following a perfect checklist. It's about giving your brain a consistent sequence of signals that say, okay, the day is winding down, it's safe to let go. Here's what my evening routine looks like, and I want to be honest that it took me a while to land on something that actually stuck. The key for me was keeping it simple enough that I could do it even on the hard days. Because if your routine requires 20 steps and an hour of uninterrupted time, it's never going to survive real life as a working parent. I start by doing a quick brain dump, just writing down anything that's still on my mind from the day, anything I need to remember for tomorrow, anything that's nagging at me. This is important because we tend to lie awake ruminating on things we're afraid we'll forget. Getting it out of our heads and onto paper tells our brains it's safe to let go of it for the night. After that, I try to dim the lights in my house. Bright overhead lighting at night signals to your brain that it's still daytime and suppresses melatonin production. Lamps and softer lighting helps your brain start shifting into sleep mode. Then I do something genuinely calming. Reading a physical book, a short meditation, or gentle stretching. The specifics matter less than the consistency. What you're doing is creating a pattern that your brain starts to associate with sleep, so that over time, just beginning your routine starts to make you feel sleepy. The last piece is protecting the 30 minutes before bed from anything stimulating. No stressful conversations, no checking work email, no doom scrolling. This window is critical. If you feed your brain stimulation right up until the moment you're supposed to sleep, it will keep chasing that stimulation long after you've closed your eyes. Now, this is the change that felt the most counterintuitive to me when I first learned about it. Because we're talking about sleep, so why does what you do first thing in the morning matter? But once I understood the science behind it, it became one of the non-negotiables in my routine. Here's what's happening in your brain when you wake up. Your body naturally produces cortisol in the morning. This is your alerting hormone, the thing that helps you feel awake and energized. But for many of us who already struggle with low arousal and slow starts, that cortisol spike is sluggish and underwhelming. We wake up groggy and stay that way for hours. Getting natural light into your eyes within the first 30 minutes of waking up is one of the most powerful things you can do to trigger that cortisol response properly. Bright morning light, ideally sunlight, but even outdoor light on a cloudy day, tells your brain unambiguously that the day has started. It kicks your circadian clock into gear, boosts alertness, and it actually sets a timer for when your brain will start producing melatonin that night. Morning light essentially programs your evening sleepiness. For ADHD brains, this matters even more because of that delayed sleep phase tendency we talked about earlier. Our brains naturally want to run later. Morning light is one of the most effective tools for nudging that internal clock earlier over time, so that you start feeling sleepy at a reasonable hour rather than at 1 a.m. In practical terms, this doesn't have to be complicated. I started simply by stepping outside for 5 to 10 minutes in the morning, just by standing in my yard, not even doing anything, just letting my eyes get that light exposure. If the weather doesn't cooperate, a bright light therapy lamp is a great alternative and can make a real difference, especially in winter months. The key is doing it early, consistently, and not filtering it through a window. Glass blocks a significant portion of the light spectrum your brain needs. I noticed a difference in my morning energy within about a week of doing this consistently. I wasn't fixed, I still had slow mornings, but that initial fog lifted faster and I found it genuinely easier to get going without relying entirely on caffeine to drag myself into the day. This one is going to feel hard if you're someone whose first instinct in the morning is to reach for your phone. And I say that as someone who absolutely used to do exactly that. The alarm would go off, I'd turn it off, and before I'd even sat up, I was already checking notifications, scrolling through emails, and opening social media. Felt like I was getting ahead of the day, but what I was actually doing was setting my nervous system on fire before I'd even had a chance to wake up. Here's what happens when you pick up your phone first thing in the morning. You immediately expose your brain to a flood of other people's agendas, demands, and stimulation. Email means tasks, news means stress, social media means comparison, and dopamine spikes. For an ADHD brain that is already prone to reactivity, emotional dysregulation, and difficulty filtering input, it's genuinely destabilizing. You spend the rest of the morning in reactive mode rather than intentional mode, and that frantic energy often follows you through the entire day. Avoiding screens in the morning isn't about being disconnected or missing something important. It's about giving your brain a protected window to wake up on its own terms before the world starts making demands of it. For me, that window is the first 30 to 45 minutes of the day. I get up, get my morning light, maybe do some light movement or read a few pages of a book, then I look at my phone. What I noticed almost immediately was that my mornings felt calmer. I wasn't starting the day already behind, reactive, and overwhelmed. I had a few minutes that were genuinely mine before the day took over. And for a working parent who spends most of the day responding to external demands, that quiet protected window in the morning became something I genuinely looked forward to and wanted to protect. If this feels impossible to start, begin small. Try just 10 minutes of no screens after you wake up. Leave your phone in another room overnight so you're not reaching for it before you've even gotten out of bed. Replace the scroll with something that requires only passive engagement. Over time, your brain will stop reaching for the phone automatically and start reaching for the calm instead. Caffeine might be how you're surviving right now. You might be having coffee, an energy drink, and using them to push through the post-lunch slump and get through pickup and dinner and everything else that comes after. And I get it. Here's the uncomfortable truth I had to reckon with. The caffeine was making the problem worse. Here's the science. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors in your brain. Adenosine is a chemical that builds up throughout the day and makes you feel progressively sleepier. It's your body's natural sleep pressure. When you drink caffeine, you're not actually giving yourself more energy. You're blocking your ability to feel the tiredness that's already there. The adenosine keeps building up in the background, and the moment the caffeine wears off, it hits you all at once, which is why the post-caffeine crash can feel so brutal. For ADHD brains, this is especially complicated because caffeine is actually a mild stimulant that can help with focus and regulation. Many people with ADHD find that moderate caffeine genuinely helps them function better. The key word is moderate. There's a significant difference between caffeine as a tool and as a crutch, and most of us who are chronically tired have crossed well into the crutch territory without realizing it. The number I landed on that made a meaningful difference for my sleep was keeping my total daily caffeine at or under 100 to 150 milligrams. That's just enough to be a moderate, intentional amount that gives me focus benefits without sabotaging my sleep later. The other piece that matters as much as the amount is the timing. Caffeine has a half-life of about 5 to 6 hours, meaning that caffeine you drink at 3 p.m. still has half its caffeine in your system at 8 or 9 p.m. That caffeine is actively interfering with your body's ability to build sleep pressure and wind down for the night. My personal cutoff is noon. I know that feels early and it's an adjustment, especially if you're used to an afternoon pick-me-up as a daily ritual. But the change in my evening energy and my ability to fall asleep was significant enough that I genuinely don't miss it anymore. If you're currently drinking a lot of caffeine, don't go cold turkey. That's a withdrawal headache waiting to happen, and it won't make you want to stick with it. Reduce gradually over 1 to 2 weeks, shifting your cutoff time earlier and lowering the total amount slowly. Your sleep will start improving before you even reach the 150 milligram threshold, which is usually motivating enough to keep going. So there you have it, the 6 changes that took me from always feeling tired to feeling good in the morning. Exercise, consistent sleep and wake times, an evening routine, morning light, avoiding screens first thing, and keeping caffeine moderate and early. I want to say one more time what I said at the beginning. Chronic exhaustion is not the price you have to pay for having ADHD, kids, and a career. It feels that way because it's been true for so long. But your brain is not broken, it just needs the right conditions to rest. And these 6 things for me created those conditions. If you're sitting here thinking, okay, but where do I even start? Pick one, just one. If I had to choose the highest impact starting point for an ADHD brain specifically, I'd say consistent wake time. Set your alarm for the same time tomorrow as you'll set on Monday. Stick to it even if you went to bed late, and do that for 2 weeks. Everything else will start to build from there. If this video resonated with you, I'd love it if you shared it with another working parent who's running on empty, because I genuinely think this information can change how someone feels every single day. And if you want more content like this, please subscribe, because I post new videos every other week for working parents who are trying to build a life they actually love. I also have a weekly newsletter where I go deeper on topics like this one. The link is in the description. I'll see you in the next one.